When we last left the life of Claib, he had a pretty interesting life so far. He was married 3 times, lived with several women on and off, was charged with kidnapping at one point, and killed 3 men, and all before he turned 26 years old. We talked about his parents' breakup and how he claimed that it affected the rest of his life. In this section, we will walk through his time in the Union Army during the Civil War. He will talk about how he was captured and escaped, the many raids he went on, and how he was a part of the battle for Leatherwood, Kentucky. He was also part of 2 companies in the Civil War and spent his time as a scout finding enemy camps. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But we're going to need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. The fight with the Coburn family. Claib talks about his politics as being a Democrat. However, he felt that he needed to join the Union despite his political affiliations. This did not sit well with the Coburn family, as we shall soon discover. As soon as Mr. Coburn had found out that Claib had joined the Union Army, he turned him in as being a Yankee. Coburn then took measures to have Claib removed from his home on the threat of harm or death. Claib took to the woods in hiding away from people to keep this from happening. Feeling that his removal was not a strong enough message, the Coburn family went inside of the cabin and robbed it, then burned it to the ground. This left Claib's wife and children homeless. Feeling very angry about the mistreatment of his wife and children, Claib caught one of the Coburn family members walking down the road with the Jones family household goods in tow. Jones and Coburn began to fight about who rightfully owned the goods. Coburn pulled out a large knife on Jones. Jones pulled out his pistol and knocked the knife out of the hand of Coburn. Jones then knocked down Coburn, picked up the knife, and took several swipes at Coburn and left him laying on the road. This might mean that Claib either killed the man or severely wounded him. Federal forces. Claib went to Perry County, where he enlisted with Tom Johnson from the United States Army, who was raising a battalion of soldiers. They soon had enough men and went to Harlan County to join with the Harlan Battalion. There, they elected Mr. Blankenship to be their major. The battalion was mustered into the Union Army on October 13, 1862, and were mustered out of the Harlan Battalion on January 13, 1863. Clay became the first lieutenant under Captain George W. Morgan of Company A. Jones was in charge of scouting and advice on how to conduct raids. Capture and escape. While going to Floyd County to see his wife and mother, Jones was captured by Colonel Caudill, who took him to Letcher County under heavy guard. While in Letcher County, they were camping at Rock House and stayed in the area for 3 days and nights. Jones learned that Caudill's company was ordered to Richmond, Virginia, and he was determined that he would not go with them. The weather was cold, so there was a huge fire built at the mouth of the tent. Jones laid down at the outer edge of the tent and began working the tent pegs loose. Once they were loose, he turned over to survey his surroundings. He spotted a pistol that a guard had laid on the end of a log of wood. As soon as the guards were asleep, he grabbed the gun, laid back down, and lifted up the tent that he had removed the tent pegs from, and rolled out of the tent and made good his escape. The tent that he was held in was located in the middle of the camp, but he was able to get out of the camp without being seen. To keep from freezing to death, Jones ran all night along the ridge of the hills. About 11 o'clock the next day, he followed the young man to the old live breeding farm and asked for a meal from Mr. Breeding, who was a Union man. He was given dinner and told where he could fill his canteen full of moonshine whiskey. After drinking enough to make him feel brave, he left the area. After walking a mile, Jones crossed paths with Colonel Ben Cottle. Cottle drew his sword, demanding that Jones turn around. Jones drew his gun and told Cottle to leave him alone and go on his way. Jones didn't know if the gun would work or not, so this was a bluff. Cottle didn't know that it was a bluff and turned around and went his way, but put out a $500 reward for his capture. The two would meet again as Jones helped to capture Cottle at Gladeville, Virginia. While making his way back to the Union camp, Jones met up with two other Union men, and they made a raid on the rebels' camp about 5 miles below Whitesburg, Kentucky. After firing upon the rebels, Jones was able to get a man named Mitchell away from his horse. Jones took Mitchell and his horse both to the Union camp with him. Jones captures Stamper. This is the story of how First Lieutenant Claib Jones captured Captain Hiram H. Stamper. Misfortune often befalls those of us that takes things into excess. The love of apple brandy, often called applejack, is no exception. In Letcher County, during the Civil War, Aunt Cynthia Boggs owned an apple orchard. But this was not her primary income. Her fortune came from the production and distribution of the alcoholic beverage known as applejack, which was very popular in colonial America as a drink of choice. But for Confederate Captain Hiram H. Stamper, his well-known love of the drink would bring about his downfall. Stamper's love for the drink was such that he strategically placed his camp and command near the Boggs farm in Whitesburg in order to protect this valuable Civil War resource. Learning of Stamper's unmitigated love of the drink led First Lieutenant Jones to concoct a plan to reunite Stamper with his love. Marching all night, Jones and his company made their way silently to the farm and laid in wait in the woods. Hiding in the brush, the Union scouts observed the Confederate camp for over a day. That evening, Captain Stamper would once again visit his love at the Boggs farm. Carrying 2 empty jugs across his saddle, he made his way to the farmhouse. After an ample time, an argument broke out at the farmhouse between Stamper and Boggs over payment. Jones, seizing the moment, took 2 of his men and went into the house, drew their guns on Captain Stamper, and forced him to surrender. Stamper resisted capture and put up such a fuss that Jones agreed to have the jugs filled for him and paid for it, so that Stamper would come peaceably. Jones then sent a girl with a note telling Stamper's men that he was now a captive, and that if they were fired upon, Stamper would be killed immediately. Jones then mounted the horse and took Stamper to the camp. In the meantime, Colonel Cottle had captured Federal Captain Webb. Under the flag of truce, a prisoner exchange was held in which Webb was exchanged for Stamper. Attempted capture of Jones and the rebel camp raid. A few weeks after this, Major Blankenship had let his men go home for a 5-day furlough. The rebels got wind that the men were on their way back and began to capture them on the road one at a time. Colonel Cottle was also lying in wait for Jones so that he could capture or kill him by himself and not have to pay the reward money. Jones had gotten word of this while he was still at his home. Jones was able to avoid the capture. When darkness fell, the rebels tried to cross the mountain back to their camp. They came across a company of their own men and got into a fight with them, which caused an escape of most of the Union men that had been captured. Major Blankenship was mad and made a raid on the rebel camp, but lost 2 men in the attack. Battle for Leatherwood. One of the most well-known battles in eastern Kentucky was for the township of Leatherwood that took place on October 19, 1862. The story of the Battle of Leatherwood, Kentucky can be found in our video or on our website as the written story of Cottle's Army. You can also find out more information about the 10th Kentucky Rifles with our video or story called the 10th Kentucky Mounted Rifles, The Two Battles for Whitesburg, Kentucky. Captain David J. Cottle and his men from Company B of the 10th Mounted Rifles were guarding a salt works in Leatherwood, Kentucky. The production of salt was very important to the economy of the area at the time. Captain George Morgan and Lieutenant Claib Jones, with their Harlan County Battalion, came toward Leatherwood to attack the guarding Confederates. They took their positions across a creek from the guards and opened fire. Shots were fired, and several of the men from the 10th Mounted Rifles were wounded. A battle ensued and lasted several minutes. The 10th Mounted Rifles quickly retreated to Whitesburg, Kentucky, because they had lost their position. Jones gives us an account of his part of this event. The plan that Jones and Captain George Morgan came up with was to drive the rebels out of Perry County. On their way, they met and engaged in battle at Leatherwood Creek while the rebels were trying to steal watermelons from a handicapped farmer. One man from each side was killed and several men were wounded in the battle. Jones had shot Captain Jesse Cottle in the backside. They had won the battle and gotten the rebels' food away from them. The battle with the Georgia Ann Tigers. The next battle that the Harlan Battalion was involved with was against the Georgia Ann Tigers, who were near Harlan Town. They surrounded their camp and fired upon them before daylight. Even though they formed a line for battle and fired several rounds in return, the rebels lost the day. The battle lasted 3 hours. There was 18 dead and many wounded, and 2 more died of their wounds later that day. Jones says that they buried the dead soldiers and returned to their camp. Colonel Slemp from Virginia. According to Jones, one night Colonel Slemp and his men came from Virginia and ran everyone out of the Union camp. They fought against Slemp the entire time he was occupying their camp. This went on for more than a week before the Union could return to their camp. Nearby to the camp lived a man named Everso who ran a moonshine still. He fired upon the rebels who got too close to his barrel of moonshine. However, the rebels were able to drive Eversole away from his still and captured the brandy. They then proceeded to get drunk with it. Catching the rebels drunk, the Union men then killed 3 of the men and drove the rest of the men out of the camp, and Slemp and his men retreated back to Virginia. Lieutenant Bentley. One of the men in Jones's company was named Gilbert Screech, who lived on Mason's Creek near the salt wells of Perry County. This was 18 miles from camp. Major Kleinworth was at the rebel camp at Salt Wells. Henry Hall, Jones, and Screech went to Screech's house. The next day they went to scout out the rebel camp to find that too many of them were located there, so they kept on going. 1 mile from the camp, the trio of men came across a bunch of rebels in the road. Both sides opened fire upon the other. Jones wounded the lieutenant. The rebels hid in the pine and laurel bushes on the side of the road. The trio had won the day, but had to leave the spoils behind. For now, we will leave Jones in the Civil War. And we will pick up next week with a series of raids, guarding the wounded on Car Fork, Jones joining the 14th Kentucky Cavalry, the battle for General Applejack Barrel, the death of Miles Webb, and the last battle he would fight in the Civil War. A special thank you. We wish to once again thank all of those who have helped us to gather information about the people in this series. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living could not do the amount of research and storytelling that we do without the help of some great historians and friends. We have a special list today of people that we wish to thank. A special thank you goes out to Anthony Blair for helping us to find a copy of Claib's autobiography. Vicki McPeaks Tackett for her endless research in Pike County for us. And Charlotte Hicks Cottle for her help about the Jones family. We would also like to thank a friend who wishes to remain anonymous. Our very special friend helped us to replace a piece of equipment that went down. Thank you for your help in our time of need. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit the like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notifications button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.